Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Campus Consortium's Grant Briefing webinar on Student Information System Grant. In today's presentation, Thomas Abraham will show how this grant can help you deliver innovative technology at affordable pricing to your institution. Our presenters today include Mr. Thomas Abraham and Mr. John Wanamaker, Executive Director at Campus Consortium. We will take the questions at the end of today's presentation that have been typed into your chat box or questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Now, without further ado, please allow me to present Mr. John Wanamaker and Thomas Abraham. Over to you, John.
Very good. Many thanks, Chris. That was Chris Jacob, our grant coordinator from Campus Consortium. My name is John Wanamaker. I'm the Executive Director of Campus Consortium. Before we kick off today, I do want to just quickly note a word of thanks to our sponsors. As you'll see on this next slide here, we have several sponsors who make possible our work in these webinars that we host, as well as a series of Ed Talks that Campus Consortium hosts. We are supported and funded by these sponsors who are committed to helping us drive a more modern digital experience on campuses across the globe. So I do want to shout out to our sponsors, and as you can see here on the slide, we have Unified, Quick Launch, Oracle, Black Belt Help, and Salesforce, just to name a few of our sponsors here. A little bit about the Campus Consortium. Here on the next slide, we have a bit of an overview on the consortium. Founded in 2003, by 14 different institutions who came together at EDUCAUSE, looking to help other institutions scale and embrace new technologies coming on the EdTech scene. Campus Consortium is a leading nonprofit education association with thousands of higher ed institutions and K-12 school district members across the globe. The Campus Consortium's mission is to help members reduce the time, cost, and effort associated with implementing enterprise IT services by leveraging shared IT services, lessons learned, and best practices so that each institution and member can avoid reinventing the wheel when adopting new technologies. Overall, the Campus Consortium is focused on reducing the cost of college and education across the globe. On the next slide here, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the additional grants we are currently running in addition to the Student Information System grant that we are going to be reviewing with you all today and helping you understand the benefits of how a grant can improve the student information system experience for your institution. Currently, we are running these following 5 grants. The application deadline for these, as you'll note on the slide here, is May 20th, in just a couple of weeks. We are running grants for student recruiting and CRM, student information system grant, which we'll be talking about today, AI for admissions and enrollment grant, financial aid center and services, financial aid call center services grant, and campus safety app grant. We welcome you to check out these grants, and you will find more information as well as other grants available at campusconsortium.org. And if you have any questions, we can take those again in the chat box, and we will share these grants again at the end of the presentation along with the contact information for pursuing more information on those grants. All right, so we're just going to quickly take a look at a couple of comments here that we've received in the past from other participants who have been awarded a grant, who have gone to report great things about how their institution has transformed on various levels based on how they were able to be awarded a grant and implement the grant and the technology that it supported. Got a great comment here from Hector Gonzalez, who is president of Southwest Texas Junior College, commenting on Campus Consortium's grant and how that has transformed their college at various levels. We also have a quote here from Bart Darrell, who's president of Kentucky Wesleyan University. He is also sharing some really good feedback about how Campus Consortium grant has made a difference at their institution. So just a little bit of feedback and some comments and a little bit of focus on who we are as an organization and how we help to serve the space and how we aim to drive the conversation around digital innovation and cost savings across many campuses. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about the Student Information System grant that we're currently running. With me today is Thomas Abraham, who's a technologist with us. He is going to give you a bit of a walkthrough of the grant, give you some insight into the coverage and process, and ultimately how that can impact results for your institution. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas and welcome him to the Campus Consortium Grant Briefing Webinar on Student Information System.
Great. Can we move to the next slide around best of breed? Thank you. So all of you are using different systems. Some of you are using similar systems, and it's sort of difficult to talk about a student information system without the context of CRM and HR and finance. And I'll explain why. It's obvious to most of you. If you're running, for example, Banner, most Banner institutions are also running HR, finance, and financial aid with Ellucian. In fact, it's difficult to migrate because for a migration to happen, the cost of the migration, just the cost of change, along with having solutions in each of these areas that are cost effective, has really been elusive. And then some of you have maybe, to get out of the shackles, moved to Slate on the CRM side, for example. It's possible that many of you are running, for example, Blackbaud, Razor's Edge on the advancement side. Power Campus schools, for example, are running ADP for the most part. They're running applications like College Board's Power Fades for financial aid. So everybody's got a slightly different context on what their investments are in terms of their current investments. So ultimately, the challenge is how do we migrate to something that is, say, best of breed, or do we just, do Workday and pay a bunch of millions of dollars to migrate to something that is questionably better, because Workday is still living on 5 to 10 years old technology. So the approach that we have taken is slightly different than just financing Workday, because we think this can be done better, or the problem can be solved more effectively. If you look at this particular slide, you'll see this is an example of Westcliff University. They have Moodle. Most of you are going to run Canvas, Blackboard, or Desire to Learn, Brightspace, and have, again, like I said, investments in existing legacy systems. So what we have done is we have brought together the notion of a bring your own application. And if you don't have your own application that you want to bring to the party, we can provide you with, for example, let's just say you're that Banner shop and you are on Recruiter. We have the ability through this grant and the partners that we've selected in this grant program to bring organizations like SAP to the equation, organizations like Paychex to the equation, to be able to leverage your Moodle implementation, to be able to bring Unified for a number of services, and to be able to bring College Board to the party for financial aid. So this seems more interesting when you start to look at the next slide. Can you please, administrative team, move to the slide? Actually, can you move 2 slides forward? Because one more, because I think the Westcliff Financials are next. Yeah. So for the diagram that you just saw, we have financed a grant out to Westcliff for approximately $4 million to support a conversion from where they were, which is Banner. And this is the breakdown of the financing of that institution. Now, they're only 1,000 FTE. So their grant is about 4 million. And if you start to get bigger, to 5,000 FTE, obviously the numbers will reflect the larger FTE requirements. But in the case of Westcliff, they decided to migrate to Paychex. They decided to migrate to SAP Finance. They decided to migrate to College Board. They decided to migrate to Unified. Now, in your case, you may not decide to change your slate, for example, CRM. And if you decided not to do that, you would just eliminate the entire set of line items related to CRM and just focus on the line items that you needed. Let's say, for example, can you go now back 1 slide, Chris, to OKW? If you look at OKWU, very similar. However, they're using Great Plains and ADP, and those particular applications were already in play, and they didn't want to change them. So was College Board. So you have the ability to stay with the current service providers that you're happy with in spaces like financial aid, HR, and finance. Why change something if it's already working for you and can be leveraged? So if we take this sort of analysis a step further, again, mostly the notion here is stick with the systems that you're happy with and change the systems that you feel like need to be modernized, and also break the problem down into phases so there isn't a giant risk being taken to displace CRM, student, financial aid, HR, and finance, because these systems, when they change, are really dangerous because they're talking to and integrating with so many other systems and applications that they're connected to. So can we go to the Oklahoma Financials, which I think was 1 slide before this? So here you have a slightly bigger institution, but pretty much the same size. And you get a rough sense of the numbers that are very similar, slightly different, within this particular organization. But this gives you a more accurate sense. Now, the grant program that we issued said $1 million up to that's 1 year. So as you look at the 10-year program, even for a smaller institution, the grant support can be pretty substantial. Now, let me turn it around and give you the summary. So to transition a Westcliff from Banner to SAP, Paychex, including CRM, student system, bringing in College Board, the total cost for Westcliff is $175,000 year 1. It's $175,000 each year with a maximum increment of 3% based on CPI. So our aim has been to bring in very strong partners. I would call it almost domain expert Rolls-Royce players like SAP, College Board, and pretty much these 4 HR players is what we've partnered with so far, which is ADP, Paychex, Paylocity, and SAP HR. And for an institution of, again, anywhere between, if you look at the Oklahoma Financials carefully, you'll also see that their numbers add up to approximately $175,000, from an outlay standpoint. So the Oklahoma operation continues to handle the payments to ADP and Microsoft directly. So their net financial contribution, and that's inclusive of any one-time migration, can you go to the Westcliff Financials, please? Again, Chris, that would be great. If you look at the total contribution, it winds up in that 175, 225 range, depending on what you're paying current vendors versus if you're displacing the HR and finance application. So for a normal institution, choosing between building a student center, meaning a $4 million capital expense, and getting support to be able to migrate, in all reality, we've enabled Westcliff and Oklahoma to migrate at lower than the current maintenance cost of their Ellucian contract, or in the case of Westcliff, their Ellucian and Salesforce contracts, and their previous HR and finance contracts. So that's really the aim of the grant program, which is, can we help institutions long-term migrate or modernize at a cost that is ideally equal to the current maintenance cost? And when I look at these costs, they're not partial, they're maintenance, support, hosting, software, implementation, and integration, which is pretty substantial, especially on the student system side, given all of the integrations that need to take place across the service bus. So some of you may be thinking, well, what does this really translate to? What is the technology, or what is the functionality that that is beyond just, okay, this is affordable or makes financial sense? Can we go to the next slide and start moving to technology? So the first important bit is student systems are not just about the registrar and the bursar and being able to operate the institution more effectively from a degree audit and from an enrollment and course catalog standpoint. It's really also the ability to deliver a modern, 21st century student experience that is for the anywhere, anytime, mobile-first learner, right? So the environment basically allows for the native mobile and browser-based access to all of the appropriate services that are relevant to students. And it's not just about mobile first. That's old school. The new user experience is not even just messaging and nudging in context. We believe the new user experience is really voice. So a lot of people start talking about the back end of the student information system, which is, again, super important, but we need to make sure that we're focused on the student experience equally importantly, and that user experience is really moving in a modern environment. So we believe the student information system is actually the collapse of what we used to call the native mobile application and the campus portal products that really, for us, all consolidate to comprise of one aspect of the overall student information system. So mobile first, that's just for folks, just to stress the idea of mobile, but we're now a few years more advanced than mobile first. Can we move to the next slide, please? For sure, we have based everything on microservices architecture, and all of the participating companies, whether they be Canvas, that is a partner to this initiative, Blackboard, whether it be Desire to Learn, D2L, whether it be SAP, and even College Board, we have made sure that the interfaces across the service bus are all based on REST services, APIs are publicly exposed, and the underlying architecture for the core is based on reusable microservices. For those that are less familiar with microservices, we can take this offline, but I'm talking about Netflix OSS, Node.js, Mongo. That's another point, which is nobody wants super expensive Oracle technology that's more expensive than the student system that they're stuck with. So Mongo, Node.js, Python on the data side with machine learning and natural language processing, and then AI engines powered by Alexa and Google Dialogflow are extremely important, with the core being Dockerized across AWS VPCs. So super modern architecture, which allows the environment to be, I would just say, fundamentally cloud architected instead of hosting a legacy monolithic student system in the cloud. The days of those systems and most of the current vendors are done. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Now, it's not just about that view of the student experience or necessarily the view of the underlying microservices architecture. The constituent-centric data model is also important. The student or the constituent has to be at the center of the service, not necessarily the institution. So I'll give you an example that's silly, but when a student comes from overseas on an I-20 and is reporting back to SIS, even after they graduate, the institution has the responsibility to update SIS. So it can't be just the institution at the center of the data model. It ultimately really has to be the student, because the accountability doesn't stop, even if the student has graduated and the institution seems to have no longer a fiscal obligation to the individual. So having a system that is fundamentally architected, not lipstick on a pig on a constituent-centric data model, is really ultimately the key in terms of the underlying student record and student data model. And look at, like, for example, maybe the system of Hawaii or Arkansas State University system. You know, if it's architected with the student at the center, well, you know, students can then pop into different courses and different institutions instead of each institution, like in the Cal State system or in the California community colleges, running their own student information system, which sort of doesn't make any sense. It should really be interoperable, or the student should be able to roam at minimum throughout the Cal State system or throughout the California community college system without retrofitting the legacy products to essentially create the same output as fundamentally a student-centric data model. So as a student in the Cal State system, maybe the student is at the center, and I'm able to participate in numerous student organizations and courses that are at different institutions within the Cal State system, some of which are physical and some of which maybe are virtual or continuing education courses that are being offered by different institutions within the system. And I'm not even talking yet about institutions outside of a particular system, but I will give you an important example. We have introduced this initiative overseas to countries like Singapore and India. And part of what we're trying to do here is also connect our US institutions for the purpose of student recruiting to international institutions on a common microservices and multi-tenant fabric. So instead of just changing from, you know, Banner and paying 10 million for Workday, you know, are we really moving the needle, or are we doing what we did 20 years ago with PeopleSoft, where we're getting promises of cost reduction and really we're just throwing more people at the same problem? Rather than that, how can the student system fundamentally drive enrollment? And again, we're doing it by connecting particularly India and the US, because India happens to have 315 million students and 30,000 colleges and universities. So that's important to looking at the overall strategy, which is not just changing from red to blue, because change fundamentally for the purpose of change is just expensive. Can we move to the next slide, please? I was talking about this earlier, and I think a system that is not ready to handle, you know, students really need great customer service. I mean, bottom line, you know, students are really not excited about the various silos at an institution and data silos that we have even between the student system and the learning management system. So part of what is embedded is not just the ability to have AI, but that has AI address common questions such as how much do I owe on my bill, for example. But also for that user experience, if we think more broadly, it's not just about having it on my university app. It's also about having that user experience available through Siri, through Google Assistant, Slack, Skype, and Facebook, so that I have kind of the ability to get to my institution in the context that's convenient to me. And again, in a student-centric universe, we do want to have the students come to the university official mobile interface for the student system, but we want it to be more convenient for us to go to where they are. And again, if we don't play in the world of Siri and Google Assistant, we're really missing the boat in terms of where the student is already at. So much of it is about the student experience. Again, the obvious bits are some of the back end bits, which are for a limited set of people. And oftentimes what I see is there's a miss on really moving the needle on the student experience, which is why I highlighted some of these things. Can we take it back to the Westcliff financial slide, please? So again, just to point out the financial bits, I just want to kind of walk this through. So Westcliff was able to move from Salesforce to a new modern student recruiting CRM. They were paying something like 50 grand or more for their Salesforce maintenance cost, and they were able to net save about $25,000 from their current operating cost in Salesforce, and their net price out of their pocket was 25 grand to modernize their student recruiting CRM. Now, if you have something you're happy with, don't mess around with that line item. Leave it the way it is, and focus on the next category, which is student information system and financial aid. This is often what everybody's referring to when they're referring to the student information system, with the exception that some people are running, happily running a financial aid package, such as one provided by College Board. For those of you that are running College Board, you'll be happy to know that we partner with College Board and are working with them very closely to move them to a cloud-native microservices architecture with modern, more automated REST APIs, because it's important for us to have partners that are knowledgeable, like College Board is in a particular domain. I mean, it's not easy to manage the maintenance required on financial aid due to the policies and the rules and regulations that change often. So we're happy to delegate that, but also we needed College Board to step up their game technically, and we're pleased that they're able to do that. Most of the learning management system providers, such as Canvas, even Blackboard, and Brightspace, are already providing a great REST service interfaces. And then again, on the ERP side, if you're happy with an ADP, or you're happy with your finance system, say for example it's Workday, or you're happy with whatever it might be, then stay with it. But if you want to transition, again, this is the option that Westcliff chose. I showed you Oklahoma at ADP. Oklahoma's not moving to SAP. They're staying with their Microsoft Great Plains. That's more power to them. They don't have to, move their GL and, create uncertainty and risk. They're able to stay where they are. But with Westcliff, they're in Banner. They needed to make a move, so they made a move, and their HR team selected Paychex out of the 4 options that we gave them, and they selected SAP Finance, which is, of course, people have thought this is, when I asked Gartner how much they thought SAP would be, they thought at least 20 million and a bunch of million to implement it, but you can see what the nets out to. So, for example, if an institution like Westcliff had dropped the CRM and stayed with Salesforce, they would have wound up in the 125,000 range, year 1, year 2, year 3. Of course, the grant would have been reduced over the 10-year period. Now, you might ask, what happens in year 11? In year 11, the same grant just continues to extend, and we thank partly the grant program, and we also thank the support of these companies that are participating in the program to be able to help subsidize and also to participate in the integration accountability. No institution, except for maybe the ones that have $2 billion endowments, wants to get into the maintenance and the integration accountability between applications and systems. For those of you that are more technical, it's more about enterprise service bus, MuleSoft service mix discussion. For those that are more on the accountability CFO side, it's more about a single neck to choke from a data integration and availability standpoint. So that's the key. It's not having to compromise to the least common denominator. Now when there are great, amazing HR applications that are available in the world, and amazing Rolls-Royce financial applications that are available, it's really, I think, institutions have wanted one more option other than Workday. And again, if you see this option that we've tried to support, you're going to see it come out to 1/10. In some cases, I've seen it come out to 1/20th of the cost of a Workday implementation, but this option just didn't exist last year and the year before. Right now, we've started to select institutions. Some of the institutions that are going live on these modules are already live. These particular institutions that I've been highlighting are all going live within a 2019 window. So these are not 3-4 year implementations. These implementations are more in the 1 year window, with modules going live in parallel instead of a big bang approach to a migration. We've also seen some institutions like Camden say, we're not really sure about this whole thing. We're just going to go with maybe a few of these pieces first to stick our toe in the water, and then we'll see about rolling the rest in more of, again, risk mitigated type approach. So we encourage the risk mitigated approach. Having been on the other side of the fence, it's never good to take too much risk and moving too many bits. It's very difficult to manage a project of that complexity. So wherever it can be broken down into pieces, that's always helpful. And the logical pieces to break down sometimes can be the CRM, could be an easy one to nick off. The front end of the student system, which is mobile portal. Sometimes identity is a good place to start. Sometimes it's HR, finance. It really depends institution to institution where the right starting point is in a multi-phase type of approach. If you're extremely large, like some of you are on the call, we can run the numbers on a draft playbook for you. Some of you are in the 40,000 FTE range, and 1,000 FTE example is not exactly helpful, and the numbers aren't going to scale linearly. So if you're at 40,000 FTE, it's not going to be 40 times 40 million on the grant side. The grant will wind up being more in the order of magnitude of 10 million, realistically, just to give you a sense of where the numbers start to scale on a much larger FTE type operation. We're really excited about some of the partners that we're bringing into this initiative with 20, 30 years of experience in guiding this overall program and initiative. So that's a little bit of, again, what we have been able to assemble in terms of this grant. And I'm going to kick it back to John. John, I had to step in for Thomas. So back over to you, if maybe you want to take it from here.
Very good.
And
Thank you
Chris,
very
you
much
can go
for
on
that.
to the next slide. Yeah.
We did have a couple of questions come in that I did want to get a chance to have you address those for us. We've got some questions about how comprehensive is the training, is the initial SIS training. Can you elaborate on that for the audience?
Yeah, sure. So look, training is the key, right? Meaning we all can't just stand these systems up and hope that people are trained and that are not going to leave their jobs after they're trained. So first of all, these systems are updated every month on CI/CD releases. That means there are changes happening every month that people need to be made aware of. Secondly, people can't always travel for conferences anymore. So having conferences and expensive ones really doesn't make sense. As part of this initiative and part of the grant, we're funding at least 3 people by way of their tickets, not their travel, but their attendance tickets. So kind of trying to make it free to have a university hosted, means hosting within a university a training. Coincidentally, Oklahoma Wesleyan University is hosting this year's training, so that is helpful to some extent. The second is we've embedded into this bi-weekly remote training for those that need updates and training on new releases that are being released, so that people that are functionally involved in the system are able to get updated on what they need to know from a instructor-led, web conference style training, which is also recorded in a self-paced training program for certification, in case you have new staff or existing staff that need to be need a brush up. So we've tried to integrate the notion of training into the service delivery so that we're looking at a truly SaaS, self kind of updated knowledge base within the program, instead of having to, again, fund training and huge expenses around the maintenance of the program separately. So hopefully that answers the question around training. And if there are further questions on training, I can take those offline. John, next question.
So it's an add-on to the question about the opportunity for those to attend and enter into, be granted to attend the training. How would one go about submitting to be considered for that?
So the training is just in particular, the training is just part of the grant, right? So it's built into the grant deliverables. You don't have to submit separately for a training grant. For example, let's say you have the 3 core people that are going to attend the annual 3-day conference at, again, this year at Oklahoma Wesleyan University. They would just get 3 tickets that would otherwise be $1,000 or so each for free, period, end of story. There's no need to apply for that. There's no need to apply for the remote training that is being conducted every other week in a working group style. So there's no need to pay for that, or you just have to show up to the party. And the third, self-paced training, like a continuing ed course, is also free. So you just need to, register, and as many people as you want to participate in the continuing ed training certification courses, which is great because they also get continuously updated. So there's no separate grant or need to pay separate money. The only thing you would need to cover in that storyline is you would need to cover, if you decide to go to Oklahoma or wherever the next conference is, you'd cover the cost of the travel to get there if you wanted to attend that user sort of a training gathering. John, I hope that helped cover the question on the secondary grant.
It does. And there was a question too about continuing ed and online learning throughout the experience, and is that available and part of what is delivered with this SIS?
Yep. Just like the notion of support hosting, a lot of people have a pain point around, somebody left and they held the keys to the castle, or they were the knowledgeable person on Banner and on this particular degree audit. So that's not great. That's not helpful because that also locks us into these shackles of sticking with these systems that we think are irreplaceable. So we really need to make sure that knowledge is, as free flowing as the notion of moving from legacy premise implementation to microservices cloud. So it's not the same thing as microservices cloud, but the notion is to not have knowledge just be exclusively held by a few people that just happen to know what button to click. It really needs to be more available, especially for existing staff development and for new people that roll in case industry steals our team. We need to be able to reproduce our players cost effectively and rapidly. So that's very important. Otherwise, you get these really unique skills like Banner DBA or colleague administrator, and that's not great either. And it's not just for sake of not being taken for a ride. Those people also want to skill up and do other things, but then they're stuck in doing reporting on Banner or something that they don't necessarily want to do, and that's why they wind up taking an Oracle DBA job at some pharmaceutical company because it's more challenging, right? So we need to make sure that, again, base training is done well and it's embedded into the program over the 10-year plus period. Not, again, okay, there's another now 50, 80,000 that you got a budget for staff development. Ideally, we contemplated actually funding going on site to every single school once a year. We're still thinking about that, but it might wind up being extremely large if we wind up, rolling with 50 to 100 institutions over the next 2 years. That's a lot of flying out to, 100 or 200 institutions. So we don't want to overcommit and then not be able to sustain a program and have to pull back. So it's better we can support these 3 initiatives and then layer on something and make it available extra instead of taking it away once we've committed to it. So I'm sticking with the first answer, and then we're looking at could we deploy a team to each campus for 2 to 3 days as part of the program every year also. Thinking about it, not there on that point yet. John, back over to you on questions.
Sure. One more related to timing and implementation. So we have a question related to if a grant is awarded now, what is the time required for us to implement the SIS?
So everybody's a little bit different in terms of when they would be. Can I get presenter control? I want to show you a couple of examples of timelines. I don't know if that's possible or if it's going to create a problem in the strategy. But I wanted to give you, not just a fluffy answer, but kind of a real one. So here is Camden County College's playbook. You'll see it stretches from 19 to 22. I'm going to try to show you a couple of others so you get a sense of the differences in similar diagrams, but difference in strategy. You'll see the next one. Just bear with me for a second. You'll see. Let's just take one that we've already used. So you should be able to see now Westcliff. They've got a completely different strategy here, which is not 2022. It's December 31st, 2019, with a fallback plan B to summer 2020. So everybody's got a different playbook of what they're going to do first, what they're going to do second, what sequence they're going to follow. It's not an infinite set of sequences and an infinite number of years. It's, once you do about 10 of these permutations and combinations, it sort of becomes like fractals where you can sort of see where, what might need to move first, second, and third. And that is some of the complexity, which is, all these things are connected. So what do we move first? What do we move second? Where do we stand up a pilot system? Where do we do testing with data in parallel? So each institution really has a separate timeline, and that has nothing to do only with size of institution. It has to do with, people, systems, priority, what's going to move, what's not going to move, staff avail. A lot of, factors go into the plan. And most importantly, this plan is the way it is because the president said, I want to go live by December 31st. And, and the pushback was, that's pretty aggressive. Let's come up with a fallback in case we don't hit December 31st go live. So each of these plans, your plan will have to be specific to you, and it doesn't have to start right now. It can start maybe next year. Maybe planning happens this year and stuff starts next summer. If you look at the notion of 19 to 22 on Camden, that's a long set of timelines to make magic happen. So again, I would say number one, everyone is tailored to the timeline and the module rollout that makes sense for you. The most aggressive I've seen is this: we're going to wrap everything up and replace everything in a 6 to 9 to 10 month window, which is I think it's aggressive. What's more normal is the Camden 2022, 2021 type of playbook. And again, it's all of these factors should go into what moves first based on need and business value and integration and complexity discussion. But it's not rocket science. It's relatively easy to draft plan and then drill down into the details. I hope that helps. So you don't have to start your project if you're selected like next week. And again, there's a good amount of planning that is required, and also a lot of discussion around current pain points and wish list, not just, okay, we're going to slam the system in and then it takes us nowhere better than what we had before. I know a lot of people that implemented Banner 15, 20 years ago or 15 years ago when it wasn't exactly Lucian, and they were promised, people would be reduced, automation would take care of that, and that's not exactly what happened. In reality, people were increased in some cases by 500%. In terms of cost going up instead of going down. So we really need to look more thoughtfully at the, what are the pain points and wish list items, because those are important. This whole initiative has been built by universities in terms of providing feedback on their current Power Campus or Colleague or Banner or whatever, issues beyond the business issues, and that's important to incorporate, some of those victories and automations, especially for the student records and degree audit areas. So I would always recommend breaking the project down into, again, modular victories that are shorter in nature, like a CRM strategy could roll out in a 3 to 4 month window, and you can be victorious. So it's always good to think about, again, planning and execution, design and execution, split and execution broken into different phases, but it's like Lego blocks. They all connect, so there needs to be a reasonably thought through architecture for the 2 to 3 year or 1 year game plan. John, back over to you on other questions.
Excellent. Our last question is related to what we refer to as the letter of intent. For each application, a letter of intent is required. We're being asked, what should that letter of intent include, and what would be good for an institution to highlight in their letter to help advance their opportunities for the grant?
Right, so there are two pieces. One is we suggest a letter of support from a previous grant recipient so that you're just more well informed about the grant process and program, and have a mentor that can be of assistance downstream as well. That's not critical, but it helps everybody come in with eyes open. The second thing is a letter of intent. See, these projects are, for us, we can't fund 100 institutions or 200 institutions. It's a lot of money, and we want each project to be successful. So in reality, we've seen it's hard to decide who's in charge of these projects. A lot of times, the CIO is sort of thrown into the mix to be in charge, even though they may not be the expert on any of the modules and features and functions. They just sort of are by default the person in charge of a student system, transition. But really, these things impact, enrollment, especially if the CRM is in the mix, the president, the CFO for sure, the registrar, the provost. And a letter of intent is, hey, is the institution really on board with this, phase-wise, transition, or is there infighting happening where, half the institution doesn't really want to roll and the other part does, and, the project is going to wobble and die at some point. We want to make sure that the executive team it's usually the cabinet that needs to get on board with something this significant. We do this for all of our grants, but this one for sure, is one that involves the backing of the institution, because it ideally affects our ability to build an institution that is internet ready, that is able to double or triple its enrollment. And that's why I think we need these modernizations, not just to change for the sake of changing, but we're modernizing to address now what is an internet era scale. So ultimately, the support of the institution then is helpful versus, we got one person that wants to do it, and then it's the CIO and he's got no support or she's got no support from anyone else. That's not going to go too far once we start touching, the student records, once we start touching, the curriculum and enrollment. So I hope that helps. John, if you have a follow-up to that or any other question.
No other questions. We're going to move now to close out here the session. A couple of things that we want to follow up on are reiterating the number of grants we have yet still open between now and May 20th. So we want to share that slide again with some of those outlined, and want to encourage folks to check out campusconsortium.org, where they can learn more information about each of these grants and find the application for those. As you'll see here, there are 4 others, including the Student Information System grant that we talked about today. So please visit the website, check that out. We also want to comment on an Ed Talk that we have coming up later in the month of May, the very end of May. We will be hosting one of the efforts that we do as a consortium in the way that we are trying to drive peer-to-peer learning and instruction and keep folks apprised of different changes and different opportunities for their institution to be better prepared for technical innovation and for advancement. Our next conversation is all about GDPR. So this is about becoming GDPR compliant and understanding what is required of GDPR. We have one of the world's most significant and resounding assessors who will be leading that conversation. That is on May 30th, 2019. So we will for sure invite all of you to join that conversation. We will also be following up this conversation today with a recording of this session as well as the presentation slides. Any questions that you all have after receiving those, please reach out. We will attach another copy of the SIS grant application for you all to review or complete. And with that, we will wrap up today's session. We will thank Thomas Abraham for his time today and for an excellent presentation. And we'll thank all of our attendees today for joining and wish you the best of luck as you pursue grants to enhance and deliver an experience with your SIS that is about a modern campus and about meeting your students' digital expectations. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to working with you in the future. This is John Wanamaker signing off from Campus Consortium.